Hey Twitch, I'm Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our fun little live stream Q&A.
Yeah, this is our first time doing a live Q&A, and hopefully not the last. And so yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
So we're just going to be talking about starting new campaigns, just basically riffing on what we love about D&D, how much we enjoy the game, which if you're watching our show, you already know that we enjoy quite a bit.
Yes, indeed.
So yeah, we're just going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a few other things, and we're going to answer some questions. We already have a few questions that were sent in from our patrons.
Yeah, our lovely patrons over on Patreon have sent us a list of questions that they wanted to see us tackle in this episode. And so we're going to read them off and hopefully use those as a starting point for a cool conversation on starting a new campaign.
Yeah, and if anybody out there who's watching has additional questions, just write them in the comments. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And if nobody has a lot of questions, me and Monty will just talk for a while.
Yeah, and we'll ramble on. How many campaigns have you run, Kelly?
Me, I have only ran 2 campaigns, or a campaign and a half, I'll say.
Yeah.
I ran a homebrewed campaign, which was my first dive into being a DM, which about halfway through that campaign, I realized that I had bitten off a bit more than I could chew.
Yeah.
Considering I was like, I'm a first-time DM, but I'm also a writer, so I'm just going to write my own. And I wrote like a 100-page novel on all the things going on in this world before my head just started to melt. And I was like, guys, I think I need to run a pre-written module first so that I understand the ins and outs of this. And I'm just about to wrap up, I guess if you want to consider Tyranny of Dragons one campaign with Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, I'm just about to wrap up Rise of Tiamat with my group. And it's been, I've learned so much running this campaign, and it's been just really an incredible experience.
Sweet.
What about you?
I've run more campaigns than I can possibly count. But I think probably somewhere in the range of at least 10.
Yeah.
As far as campaigns that I have like completed, it's probably quite a bit more than that. I think with you, I've completed 3 campaigns.
We're on our we're on our 3rd campaign now.
Yeah. And that's been a long road. Like, I mean, I think that the process of doing so many campaigns together, especially when you get to run a campaign from start to finish and completion, really teaches you a lot of key lessons on then what you want to apply to the next time you start.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest issues that I've run into time and time again is like, how do you start? Like, what do you need to do to actually get started with a new campaign?
What's really awesome is if we're talking about starting a new campaign, I think this current campaign that we're playing in, you kind of nailed the opening arc, which we had a lot of conversations about, and it's something that I think we worked as a group to really come up with this idea for starting this current campaign.
Yeah, with our current campaign that we're running, we put a lot of work together into getting started, but that's not typical for many groups, because that was something that we had the experience of being a group that's worked together for several years, really.
Yeah.
And been able to collaborate and know our tastes really, really well, and doing all that from like a session 0 to the next steps that we were able to figure that out. But for anyone that is starting out just for the first time, I think that there's way more issues that you can run into with that. And one of our patrons sent us this really great question. Rafiq or Regal asked us, as a DM, how do you go about choosing a group for a new campaign? Everyone wants something specific out of a D&D game, and you definitely want to build around that. Is it easier to find the group first, then build the campaign? Or to make a campaign you really want to run, then find the people who will fit in and maybe adjust it a bit?
That is a really great question, and I mean, we were lucky enough that we did play with a group of friends, And we worked in an environment together at the time that we first started this. Me and Monty did work together. Yeah. And in that environment, the moment that me and Monty started talking about playing D&D together, a group of people in our store also started to show interest. Now, what's interesting is we actually have gone through a lot of changes with that group over the years. Mm-hmm. And it was important to find the people who worked the best with us. You and me have always seemed to work really well together, which obviously is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
But the rest of the party, I'd say that if you remember, we started with a couple guys that like no longer play with us, and then like a few people got added in, and then those people stayed for a while. And I think Josh is one of the longest running. He was added in pretty early, and he's been part of our group.
I have a few pieces of advice for choosing your group. The first thing is that when you're a dungeon master and you say to your circle of friends or to the nerd community in your area, however you're recruiting players, whether you're recruiting on Roll20 or you're recruiting amongst your friends or you're recruiting at a local game store, as soon as you say that you are running a campaign, players are going to come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, there's like still to this day, people are like, "Oh, you're the Dungeons and Dragons guy? I really wanted to get into it." Yeah. And I'm like, I don't have enough room at my tables.
Some people that I've talked with on Reddit or other chats say, I started a D&D campaign and I decided to tell all my friends, and now I have 11 players. What do I do? And the problem with that is that you've got a lot of excited people that are probably new to the game. But as a new DM, especially when you're running a campaign for the first time, you need to know what your hard cutoff limit is going to be. And you never know who's going to play D&D with you and who's going to stick until you play with them. But I think that with choosing a group, that one of the first things is that, pick people that have similar tastes to you in fantasy fiction, video games, and the like. Pick people that you can cooperate well with. Pick people that you would feel confident organizing an event with.
Yeah, and one important thing here is you may have some really close friends that you do want to play with, but you might find that as you start playing with them, that the D&D world, you're not compatible in that sense. And that's one of the hardest lessons, is like, oh, you're my best friend, we should play together. And then you just kind of disagree on the way you want D&D to go. And a lot of people want different things out of this game. So that's kind of a hard lesson, and you need to be open-minded, whether you're a player or the DM, when you're jumping into a game for the first time. Is it the right fit for you? And you need to be open to the idea that it might not be, and that you might need to find a new group or form your own, depending on how that goes.
100 Years Boris says 3 to 4 people for me, otherwise it becomes a contest for attention. And Waichin says old friends from growing up are a really good resource. And I agree with both of those things. I think that the thing to know is that if you have a really big group, as soon as your group size gets larger than really 5, the shift of the focus of Dungeons and Dragons shifts from being a social event, shifts from being about playing Dungeons and Dragons to being a social event. And eventually just your party just becomes a party.
Yeah.
And the number of people that you want to have in your campaign is going to speak to, do you want to play Dungeons and Dragons, or do you want to have a fun time with friends? And if you want to have a fun time with friends, and that's the primary purpose of your event, invite as many as you like. If you want to play Dungeons and Dragons, cut things off around the 4 to 5 mark. Make sure that, and because especially with larger groups, you're going to have an impossible scheduling problem of actually getting all those people in one place. And schedule compatibility, I find that schedule compatibility is actually more of a deal breaker than anything else. And when you're starting a campaign, I really encourage you, don't be flexible with the date and time as the dungeon master. You as the dungeon master need to decide, like, ask people what it's going to be, but once you decide when it's going to be, keep it to that night. If it's going to be Monday nights at 6, if it's going to be Saturday afternoons at 2, don't try to shift the day within the week. Play as consistently as you can at the same time in the week and the same time of day. because over time, eventually that will become a consistent thing. Make sure that you have your start and end times really, really fixed.
Yeah, when I started DMing, I just said to my group, hey, you know what? We're going to run this fast and loose. We're just going to find days that work for us every week. That quickly fell apart.
Yeah.
That we couldn't ever plan a day. We couldn't ever figure anything out. I happened to have Mondays off, so I said, guys, we're playing Mondays. We're playing Mondays at 6:00. And that gives me the whole day to do what I need to do, and like I can set up a nice session for us. And everybody eventually agreed to that, and that helped me find a consistent group, because the people who couldn't stick to that were like, no, that doesn't work for me. And I was like, okay, well, that's what's going to work for me as the DM, and I'm the one who has to create this game world and run the game, so that's what it's going to be. And then I now have a consistent group of 5 people who show up and play almost every week.
And I will say that within the smaller group sizes, like from the 3 to 5 mark, that's going to really depend as well on how much you want each individual player to take the torch. Because with smaller group sizes, that means that each individual player is asked to contribute more. And with larger groups, each player gets to contribute less. Because if you think about, if you have 1 hour of playtime and 3 players and a DM, that means that each player gets to contribute 15 minutes. And if you have 5 players and a DM, now everyone only gets 10 minutes, which that might not seem like a lot, but in D&D time, that's huge, especially when turns of combat take 1, 2, 3 minutes each. Like a combat encounter that runs 3 or 4 rounds with 3 people can be resolved in 15 minutes. But with 6 people, now it takes half an hour to 40 minutes.
I do see a comment here about, like, yeah, obviously sometimes you are going to take breaks. Sometimes being consistent is a challenge. Even we have had to take like a month off for people's lives and things like that. That's just something that happens. But if you're attempting to be consistent, it gives people a reason. They know when they're going to be showing up, and they can rely on that. But yeah, life happens, and like, you know, I went home to my hometown for a week, and we didn't play D&D that week, and you know, it happens.
Yeah, we usually take December off because it's crazy. Many of us, there's a few of our friends that work retail jobs, so that's impossible to get them out in December. People are going away for family, and I find taking a month off in the summer is a good moment as well. Home Kev 99. I live in a really small community, population 300. I can only play online, and I'm having a really hard time finding a group of people that are new to D&D. Any suggestions? Suggestion 1, offer to run the game yourself, and on Roll20, say that you're looking for new players specifically. You will get 1 million people. If you're not interested in running the game and you want to play, it's going to be a really uphill battle. Unfortunately, I've been hearing more and more things that for new players, getting into games on Roll20 is really, really difficult. And so I really encourage you to find spaces and create those spaces yourself. And sometimes you have to be the champion, and you have to go out and say, I'm going to run this game. And a great way to get started with that is I would suggest on Roll20 offering to run the starter set and discussing in the session 0 with the group, saying everyone's new players, we're all new to this game, we're going to have this as an experiment, and then maybe then set the expectation from the beginning at session 0 that you're running this as a way to get the group together, but you hope that other people have an interest in DMing as well, and maybe you can set up a rotation.
Yeah, as soon as I mentioned that I was going to DM a game, which it was after a few years of playing with you, and yeah, it was as soon as I said that, that's my table filled up very quickly with people who just kind of had never played before but were interested in doing that.
Oracle 44 also said Discord's a good community as well. And the Dungeon Dudes community. I would love to know if a group ever forms from our chat on our comments. That'd be super cool.
That would make me feel so proud. I'd be like, oh, thank you guys. Like, you know, you used us to find each other, and that's beautiful.
Rafiq also had a related question on this one as well. Is new DM etiquette. If you're an experienced DM and you're playing in another person's first campaign, what are your tips for helping them out without being overbearing?
I have some things to say about this.
All right, say it.
I have experienced playing with other DMs before, and there are times that like they have kind of shut me down as a player, and only because they were like, well, no, based on what I know, it can go this way or this way, and like that is something that you need to be careful for. Is if you are a very experienced DM and you jump into some new players' games. It's a good opportunity to kind of make light of it all, kind of forget all of the rules, everything that you know, and listen to what the new DM is giving to you, and use that to just have some fun. Even me, like when I play in one of Josh's games or something like that, I try not to worry too much. Or when I go to my hometown and I play in those guys' games,
Yeah.
they actually have voiced that they're nervous when they play with me because they're all newer than I am, and I'm the guy who's from Dungeon Dudes.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, what if we don't play well?" And I'm like, I'm just here to role play a crazy character and have a bunch of fun." So like when they ask for help, when those players are like, "Oh, how does this rule mechanic work?" I'll be like, "Oh, it works like this," and then they'll toss that in, and I'll just keep going. But when I'm a player and not a DM, I try to focus on my role playing and the fun I'm gonna have as that character, not so much arguing with anybody at the table or trying to over explain rules unless it's requested of me.
That's the key thing. You don't want to be a backseat dungeon master, and offer to help if it looks like the DM is struggling, but don't assume that they are. Every DM needs to learn some hard lessons themselves, and they need to have the freedom and flexibility to make some mistakes. Because sometimes you only learn certain mistakes, like don't ever use a DMPC. And that's not necessarily true, but like there's certain mistakes that you have to make yourself before you realize why they're mistakes. And so not being that backseat DM and letting them fail is kind of okay. And then you can be the safety net. Like I think the easiest thing to do as a DM is if you have an encyclopedic knowledge of the rules, help that dungeon master find the rules, but don't be the one that reads them out loud. If you know what the rule is and the DM that's running the game has asked you what it is, help them find it in the book and let them read it and then make the ruling themselves, rather than say, no, ogres have 59 hit points, right? You can say, well, this is an ogre, right? Did you check the monster manual entry? And then the DM can try that themselves.
Yeah, I even notice, and like these are common things. They're not necessarily problems, but I even notice like at my table, there's another person who plays who also DMs a game. And every once in a while, I'll be like describing a monster, and I've kind of manipulated things a little bit. And he's like, I don't recognize this monster. And I always am like, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
And then he goes, okay.
Yep.
And we carry on. But it is one of those things that you can see his DM cogs start working. And he's just like, he's saying these words. What does that mean? What is this creature he's describing? And even at your table, I find myself, I do that from time to time. You start describing something, I'm like, do I know what this is? And then I need to remind myself, like, don't worry. Just let it play out.
A few people are asking, what are the chances of a Dungeon Dudes Discord? DDD. D3. Roll a D3. It's in the works. That's about it. We're looking at what the best way is to roll that out so that we can have a positive community. We're not sure at this stage if, given the growth of the channel, how many people in a single Discord chat are going to yield a productive discussion. And we're not sure if we want to make it player focused, DM focused. So we'd be actually interested really to hear your feedback and thoughts about ways that we could roll that out. Because it is something that's been on our mind, and I've been poking around with Discord, and we've tried some things with private channels, but we haven't opened that up at all yet. So it's
we've talked about a lot of that and ways to expand, but yeah, we're working on it, and we'd love help and feedback on anything that you guys might have for us.
Yeah, but it's a thing that we've heard, and we just want to make sure that when we do it right. And like anything else, it'll be a learning experience, but we don't want to create another toxic place on the internet. We want it to be a positive place. Our comments on our videos and our chats and our streams have always been very positive and supporting places where people can learn and share ideas and be creative. So if and when we do a Discord, we want to make sure that we're doing it so that it can be that as well.
Yeah, we talked about this when we first started the channel, about the positive vibes that we were going for. Even in our episodes, you'll notice that we'll never really bash anything or like talk down on anything. We just like to talk about what we think the highlights are. And if it is something that we don't like, we might mention like, this isn't our favorite, but we always try to make it like open.
Yeah.
Everything that we want, everything that we do should be open and positive.
Because that thing that you don't like, for someone else, it could be their favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's okay to disagree, but it's not okay to kind of take a dump on somebody because they like something that you don't. We got some more questions. We did get a question earlier from Kirsten asking, how do you keep people focused in a new campaign? Especially new first-time players, like how do you bring in that focus? And it's really hard.
I think that you need to set expectations in your session 0. One thing that we talked about in one of our episodes is okay, let's bring it in, guys.
Yeah.
And, there's a certain level of respect that needs to happen, and you should let your players know about this level of respect. Me as a DM, I like go to sleep dreaming about my campaign. I plan things. I'm like putting together awesome scenarios. I like to let my players know that. I'm like, I put a lot of work into tonight's game, guys, and just let them know, like, there's always room for fun. There's always room for chat. There's so many jokes that happen at a table. It is one of the most fun things I can do with a group of friends. But at the same time, when it is getting into those story moments, into those elements, when the DM says, let's bring it in, it's respectful for every player at that table to kind of hone in and focus. And you need to set that expectation early.
100 Years Boris said, cell phones down. Do you do that? Yes and no, because a lot of us use D&D Beyond on our mobile devices. But one of the things that we have been doing at our table is we've been fortunate enough that many of our members have been transitioning to iPads or tablets. You can get some pretty cheap Android tablets as well for using D&D Beyond or using paper character sheets. But definitely, like, get off Facebook, get off Twitter, get off Angry Birds. Do people still play Angry Birds?
I don't know. I think that's...
and I heard a horror story of a group on Roll20 where one of the players was playing World of Warcraft while they were playing D&D. It, like, just... that is so...
Now, mind you, I often have my phone out at Monty's games, but that's also because if you follow us on Twitter, there are a lot of photos that I post.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of my little jobs, is I always have my phone out because I'm taking photos of every setup and every moment in the game.
Yeah, and my DM screen is my laptop. And sometimes I get an email notifying me about the latest Dwarven Forge Kickstarter, and I just have to look at it.
I didn't know that, so now every time I hear a ding on your computer, I'm going to judge you.
But other things for keeping focus as well is recognize that people have different areas of focus, and not every player is going to be 100% engaged in every single thing that happens. Some players are there for the role-playing. Some people are there for the combat. Some people are there for puzzles. And as a DM, one of the early things that I recommend you doing is vary the types of situations that you expose your players to, and make sure that you hit all those beats. Try to include an exploration moment, a combat moment, a social interaction moment, a puzzle, and try and hit all 4 of those notes in your early game sessions. And that's actually a great way to organize your early adventures, by making sure that when you're planning your adventures, hit those things. And that's going to make sure that players of various tastes all get something interesting. And a good way to kind of sandwich that is to open with a combat encounter, open with the piece of action, then have the exploration, then have the social interaction, then have another combat. And kind of bookend your game sessions with action. One of the things that I cannot stand, and with all my love and respect to Matt Mercer, I could not stand the first session of Critical Role's new campaign because I wanted the action to start happening. I was falling in love with those characters, but after the first hour, I was like, I like these guys. I want to see what happens when there's a fire under their asses. And so I really find that, like, as a DM, remember that you're in control of time, and it's okay to scoop the players up and thrust them into the action. And get the energy pumping, get the blood running.
I really like the question here about paper or digital, and I like this because I've recently had a revelation on this. Up until when did I get my iPad? Like a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Up until a few weeks ago, I was like dedicated to using pencil and paper. Still, I came with my character sheet every day. I had notes all over the place, all of this crazy stuff, and I was like. I tried to use D&D Beyond on my phone, and I didn't get it. I hadn't even looked at the other players at the table using it on an iPad. I had just like had it on my phone and looked at it and been like, I don't get what you guys love about this. I have a really hard time navigating this. Pencil and paper is way easier for me. And then I started using D&D Beyond on the tablet, and I saw it, and like within 3 seconds of seeing it, I was like, this is going to change. I'm not going to be bringing paper to my games anymore. But the benefit with that is that I'm part of your campaign.
Yeah, I'll say I love D&D Beyond. I have the Legendary Bundle, full disclosure, so I have shelled out for the whole thing. I think it's worth it. It's not the same as getting a digital copy as the books. D&D Beyond's big benefit is that you can do this content sharing thing where you add people to your campaign, and then you all have access to all the books in digital form that you've purchased. So I really like this feature. I love the searchability of the spells. For me, D&D Beyond was worth the price, and that's for me as someone that buys the D&D Beyond version and the hard copy of each book. I find it totally worth it, and the price of the books on D&D Beyond is a fraction of the cost of the hardcover books. It's usually less than half, and so I do think it's worthwhile. It's a great tool. And I think probably we're going to have to do a video where we break down why and what makes it worth it and when it's not worth it. Because there's definitely people out there that D&D Beyond is not worth you going all in for. But I think that if you have a dedicated group of players, it's probably worth strongly considering getting the master subscription to D&D Beyond and at least the core rule books.
Yeah, I will say that if it wasn't for the fact that that Monty owned all of that content, I might be a little more resistant to it because I personally was unwilling to shell out more money when I owned all the physical copies. But the benefits of having somebody at your table who owned it all, if somebody is willing to do that, then using D&D Beyond is really cool. If you're going to be that person, then as long as you, like you said, have a consistent group that's showing up every time, then you're kind of sharing that love with that group of people.
Yeah, and I will say that like the interesting thing about D&D Beyond as far as the pricing, like it does rub people the wrong way that you have to buy the book hard copy and then buy the digital copy, and that they weren't launched together and people didn't have the option from day one. The one thing that I will say to that is that the D&D Beyond crew at Curse are amazing, and they put a ton of work into D&D Beyond, and from that alone, like the work that they do, I'm very impressed with it, and I do think it is worth the money. I do wish, though, that Wizards of the Coast would explore a way of having some sort of way that if you get the hard copy book, I understand why it's not that way, but I still wish that it was an option. What method do you use for creating a new campaign? And my answer to that is we're kind of talking about it now, but I like this part of the question is what sort of tools do you use for world creation, design, map making, etc.? This is a stumbling block for me right now.
Can I say what I think we've both talked about a lot here?
Yeah.
Steal everything.
Steal it.
That's a lot of people who are new to so outside of here I also do a lot of writing work, and when I was a new writer I was afraid of copying anybody else's stuff. I was like, how do I create original ideas? You can't anymore. There's nothing original. The fact is,
to build on that, I will just say that Another big problem that we see all the time, because both Kelly and I come from a theater and film background, is amateur authors overvalue originality and underestimate how remixing a currently existing idea and adding your own personal flair to it makes that idea unique and memorable. My favorite example of this is, say what you will about the Halo games. There was nothing new in the story or premise of Halo. All of those ideas had been explored before in older games. Halo just happened to execute it really, really well. And they kind of pulled together a hodgepodge of references of like space marines, super soldiers, religious references, aliens, zombies, and you kind of grab all of your different things that your influences, and you're kind of like making a D&D campaign pizza.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about D&D is that you're not the only creator. You as the DM might show up with a plan, but your players are going to change the way that things work. So that means that if you take your favorite movie, your favorite book, your favorite plot line from anything, and just tweak it like 2%, you change the names, you change the locations, but you have like that plot line, your characters are going to make it unique.
Yeah.
There are things that I've read or listened to from D&D, podcasts or various other sources, where they've basically been like, yeah, this whole story arc was the Alien franchise. I just watched the whole Alien franchise, and I sent my party into a spaceship.
Because the unique thing about D&D and role-playing games in general is that the magic happens when the players engage with it. If you've ever sat and watched a movie, and you've been like, why did they do that? That makes no sense at all. I would never do that in this situation. A role-playing game is the opportunity where your players and you get to explore, well, okay, what if you were stuck on a derelict alien wreck with a horrible flesh-eating alien monster chasing after you? What would you do in that situation? And that's actually interesting and compelling and memorable. What I do want to say that I think gets to the heart of what Multiracial Lion is asking, though, is like, what are the specific tools? Yeah. And what are the specific things? And I will say, first of all, for maps, the big thing for maps is only draw maps if you love drawing maps. And if not, the great thing with maps is that there are amazing artists like Dyson Logos and Mike Schley and tons of creators that have drawn all sorts of things from world maps to dungeon maps to city maps and everything in between. And I guarantee you, somewhere on the internet, there is a map that looks very, very close to the map that you've been drawing. I'll give a great example of this. The last game that I ran was the city campaign that Kelly and I did. And we started out, him and I were brainstorming what this city would be like. And we drew a map, like we started to. And we started talking about all the things we want in the city. And then I realized that our map was looking a lot like the map of Tolis, which is Monty Cook's City by the Spire. So I realized that all the work of creating and filling what was in the city, which I needed to do for my campaign, had been done by Monty Cook. And I, not just because we're both named Monty, I have a lot of respect for Monty Cook as a D&D author and rules writer. But Monty's got to stick together. There's not many of us, but we have lots of pop culture references. So like having, like going on 100 Years Bore mentioned Pinterest. Google image search is stupid good for this as well. And I guarantee you that map that you have in your mind exists on the internet somewhere.
When I'm writing, when I'm like working on like that night's session, I have Google open and I have Pinterest open, and on my Pinterest on my phone, I use Pinterest for maps, artwork, things to inspire me. And I'm on Google and I'll just like write in like D&D rustic tavern, and I'll look at pictures and be like, this one, and I'll actually use that picture to sometimes show to my players.
The other great inspiration are all the Reddits. There's a bunch of great Reddits. Like, say what you will about Reddit, is that I love the Reddits where it's photography of like ruined buildings, of landscapes, portraits, Reddits about imaginary monsters. There's always so many great images that are shared on these things, and those you can get campaign inspiration anywhere, and you can definitely find subreddits that are dedicated to cataloging maps. I will absolutely say that like my favorite map maker is probably Dyson Logos. And if you Google him or find him, he's another Canadian guy. He is prolific. A bunch of his maps are going to be actually in the new Waterdeep Dragon Heist
Sweet.
book. He was commissioned to do them. He's amazing. He's worth supporting on Patreon. And he has a bunch of maps that are available for free. And he's basically done a map of everything. And they're beautiful. They're very printer friendly. And he's got a great style. And they're very neutral. So they're easy to fill with whatever you want to put in them.
I saw something really interesting on Twitter. I might not use this, but I thought it was really cool. Is somebody on Twitter mentioned using drone shots and having actual maps. Yeah. And I thought that was such. They showed a few, and there was like one of like a river flowing under a bridge, and the person, I forget who it was now, but when they posted this, they just said, use Photoshop to take out anything that's like modern, and then just leave the.
One final thing that I've always recommended is whenever you build a fantasy city, find the scale of the city on the map. It always says like how big it is in miles, and take that city map and then go to Google Maps and pull up your hometown and adjust Google Maps scale so that it's the same as the map that you've just made, and superimpose them on top of each other using an image editor. So you actually understand how big the city you just made is. It makes so many things about distances really clear, and then you can go and walk down your street and find out, oh, this is how big this city actually is that I just made. And if you're starting to make a city that's like bigger than LA, you might have made too big of a city for a fantasy city.
Yeah, in medieval times, that didn't exist. You use that even in like when we're talking about the cities that we've been creating. Yeah. You use Toronto, where we're from. Yeah. And you say it's from this street to this street and this street to this street. And I said like, yeah, and then you guys can be like, oh yeah, that is like a 2-hour walk. Yeah. And so the approximate scale. This is also really handy for other environments because you can also get floor plans of modern buildings, and you can use the floor plans of modern buildings as ruins, as maps. Like actually, many modern buildings are more like dungeons than many dungeons. Like, ever pulled up a floor plan of a mall? It looks like a dungeon. A floor plan of a school, a floor plan of a stadium. All of these things are great resources that you can steal and adapt, and your players are never going to know that you just turned that around unless you show them the real map. And you can actually, if you love drawing, working from something like that is a great thing to build off of as you're doing it. So I really recommend those sources for map making. I really like this other question. Moving on.
This is also from Multiracial Lion.
Yeah. How do you bring all the elements of separate plot hooks, arcs, and things together to form a coherent story?
I got it.
Why don't you take it then?
Cut some. Seriously. One of the best things that I when I go to my players and ask them to make a new campaign is your players are going to come to you and they're going to have created NPCs associated with their characters. So forcibly combine NPCs from players' backgrounds into the same person. The reality of it is there's this trope in theater writing that an audience can really only comprehend about 6 characters. And so your players are already maybe 6 characters. So you really have to be economical with your NPCs. And this is where I like to consolidate NPCs wherever I can, reduce the number of non-player characters that you have, make them one person, especially if those are 2 NPCs of conflicting natures, because real people are conflicted people with conflicting alliances and conflicting senses of duties. And oftentimes combining 2 NPCs takes 2 bland characters, and by smashing them together into one, you get an interesting and conflicted character.
One thing that I want to add to this regarding plot hooks and arcs, especially when you're nearing like end campaign, if you're looking at all of these different plot hooks that you've had, what's really interesting is don't tie yourself to a plot hook that you think is important in a certain chapter. What you're going to end up realizing is, I'm going to use NPCs again as an example. Yeah. I've put NPCs in there that are like I'm trying to think. In my campaign, there was a group of metallic dragons that the party went to meet with.
Factions are another great way to present many NPCs, but actually only have to design one.
What was interesting, though, with this is I decided to create a few NPCs of my own that were just meant to be throwaway characters. They were kind of the people who served the dragons. Mm-hmm. My players don't remember the names of any of the metallic dragons, but they absolutely love one of the NPCs, and as a matter of fact, a really strong bond is formed between one of my players and this throwaway NPC. So I've already decided with that, my plot hooks regarding what I thought was going to happen and how I'm going to build that towards the end. I'm now nearing the end of the campaign, and I'm like, I should bring back that character that they created that really strong bond with. So what I'm trying to say here is, your plot hooks and arcs are going to change as you're playing through it. And when you near the part of the story where you need to bring them together coherently, throw away the ones that the party didn't attach to. Mm-hmm. And bring out the things that keep coming up. If your players keep bringing up, man, I missed that one guy that we met in that town. I hope he's doing okay since that town was attacked recently. We should go check on him maybe. Now you know, hey, I need to bring that character back or have a storyline that deals with that.
Yeah. I also say is be aware of how long your plot hooks are going to last. And avoid where you can plot hooks that are going to start at the beginning of the campaign and end at the end. We talked about this in our video about tiers of play. Oftentimes a story or a plot hook or an arc can't last from level 1 to level 20 because the stories that level 1 characters go on and the stories that level 20 characters go on are fundamentally different. And so understand what tier of play your story arc fits into, and keep it to that tier. It can kind of grow above or beyond it, but oftentimes a D&D campaign is it's okay to have multiple villains. You don't need to have one big bad evil guy over the whole campaign. You can have multiple, but just one at a time, right? So if you find yourself getting all of these conflicting plot arcs in your mind, instead of having them all run at the same time, just say, you know what, this villain is great for around level 7 to 10. I'm just going to run that arc then. This villain is perfect for high level, and then you can kind of build the conspiracy underneath that links them all together.
Yeah.
But that way your players can focus on one of the... And the big thing that gives players as well is that gives your players a sense of accomplishment and achievement, and you really need to have that. If players are spending the entire campaign watching the villains win, it gets really frustrating.
I want to just... you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I immediately think of the Avengers movies.
Yeah.
And they hinted at the main bad guy in the first Avengers that after the credit scene you see Thanos.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my god, Thanos is here. But in the first Avengers, it connects to Thanos, but we're not worried about him. Mm-hmm. We have another main villain. We have other creatures to worry about. In Avengers 2, we're still not worried about Thanos.
The MCU is a great way of interweaving multiple plot lines and keeping them focused. Because the MCU has rarely done a movie that doesn't stand on its own, at least within the individual titles. Really, they keep it to the Avengers movies of being, these are the movies that you need to have seen the other ones to actually understand things. I don't know how you could understand what was happening in Infinity War if you hadn't seen Thor Ragnarok and probably
Doctor Strange.
I think that you needed to see those to understand what was happening, and probably a bit of Guardians of the Galaxy and the previous Avenger movies. But the other ones, like the Captain America movies, are a great way of separating that plot arc, but still calling out to a larger world at the same time.
Yeah. So
look to that for inspiration as a way of building that.
How do you feel about DMPCs?
Ivan Decker asks, how do you feel about DMPCs? I don't... Okay, so I have a complex opinion about DMPCs because I don't think that there is any such thing. I don't think a DMPC is possible in a system like Dungeons and Dragons. And even what people call a Dungeon Master PC is really just a NPC that's way too important. And that a DM has probably invested a little bit too much into. And the reason for this is Yeah, it's an oxymoron. Is that part of the magic of being a player character in Dungeons and Dragons is exploring the unknown and solving the mysteries and not knowing what's going to happen next. And as a dungeon master, the pleasure of being a DM is not knowing what your players are going to do next. But with the theoretical DMPC, you have both of those things operating in one person at the same time. And I just think it's so difficult to, like, if you want to have a DMPC because you want to have a player character, you're going to be robbed of that magic, of the magic of being a PC if you're also the dungeon master. You just, it's one of those situations where you can't have the cake and eat it too, because really, as the dungeon master, you are the meal, right? And so if you are being you're self-cannibalizing yourself when you're having a DMPC. That's kind of what I believe. I think that there's ways, like if you need to have an NPC that follows with the party for your story, you could, that's completely executable. But just recognize that that's not your player character, right? That's an NPC that's important.
I actually, my players have to remind me when there's somebody with them, because as a DM, I'm focusing on so many different strings that I'm pulling at that table. Just in one of the last sessions, they had like a very powerful spellcaster who was taking them on towards their next mission, and they were getting towards there, and they got into a combat, and it was like after the first round of combat, they were like, "Is the spellcaster going to help us out?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, they probably should." But like I'm too busy to worry about playing a PC at the same time as DMing. And I find that DMing gives me so many characters to play anyway. And oftentimes there are NPCs that like stick with the party or help them out from time to time. Mm-hmm. And I really try to get behind these NPCs and use them from time to time, but only to drive home certain story elements.
I also, just in my opinion, I feel that like another common reason why DMs insert a DMPC into a party is to fulfill a perceived gap in the party composition. So the common one being like, I'm going to put a NPC healer in the party because no one wants to play a healer, or I'm going to put an NPC tank in the party because no one wants to play that character. And I feel that if you're gonna do that, there's better ways to do it than with an NPC. My preference is if your party doesn't have a tank, give your party a shield golem. If your party doesn't have a healer, give them an intelligent staff of healing that anybody can attune to. Like, address the gap with a magic item, and if you need to, make it an intelligent magic item, but make it something that the party still has some sort of control over in some way. And that's just going to help separate you a little bit from the urge to micromanage things.
There's a little bit of a conversation happening here, and I actually think Out of the Abyss is a really interesting campaign to look at for this, because you start with like 10 NPCs that do follow along with the party. And I've seen it, I've read about it played many different ways, but one option is to like, rather than the DM having to control them, you hand those sheets out to the other players and you're like, you're responsible for this NPC. Yeah. The thing is that they should never be more important than the players. The players are the heroes. Even in Out of the Abyss, I find that those NPCs could help, but it's like they get one thing that they can do on their turn, and then the player takes most of the actions. And even that is kind of a complicated way. I find that a lot of the pre-written campaigns pile on NPCs that follow around the party for a while.
Yeah,
and it can be problematic for some new DMs or things like that. But sometimes you may want to put the responsibility and share that amongst the table.
Another pre-written campaign that handles this really well is Tomb of Annihilation. In Tomb of Annihilation, the party is encouraged to hire a guide to lead them through the jungle. But the party gets to choose which of the 10 guides they want to recruit. And all of the guides have their own motivations. And while some of them are really powerful and some of them are not, I found that the guide was then a really good vehicle for me to, always have somebody to talk to within the party. And that is the one benefit to having an NPC follow along with the players, is that you get a character that is your window to interact with them. But I think the big thing to remember is that when you have an NPC that is following along with the party, is you have to do the work to make sure that that NPC hasn't become the voice of God. And the way that you manifest that is that 100 Years War says 10 guides, really great variety. Yeah, and like some of them are really unique. Like some of them are a pair of halflings that have a stegosaurus, and one of them, several of them are secretly have many secrets. I won't reveal any spoilers. And some of them you can't trust at all, and will try to lead you to your death, like basically immediately. But make the NPCs that follow your party failable. Like one of the things that I always love with this, that I've done it with you guys, is my NPCs always give you their opinions, and sometimes their opinions are wrong.
I was going to say, there was this amazing scene in our current campaign where we were on the top of a mountain, and we had decided for some reason that we were going to take these statues, lay them on the ground, cause an avalanche, and sled down the mountain. And we had a dwarven engineer there, and we asked him, we're like, do you think that this is going to work? And we felt like we were asking the DM, but when he was like, okay, the dwarven engineer says, according to my calculations, it should work. And we're like, what do you mean should? And he's like, according to my calculations, I think. And we're just like, I don't know what to make of that. Let's try it. But yeah. What Monty revealed afterwards is like, he's not telling us as the DM, hey, it's going to work. He's saying this NPC believes that it will work. They could be wrong. Yeah.
And nothing will motivate your players better than having the villain kill their beloved NPC.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that I would say just about starting campaigns and building worlds in general, is as a DM, you have to be prepared to destroy your world and let your players be the giants that are going to come in and trash everything. The world needs to be forever changed by the passing of your characters. And I have run into DMs, I've played with DMs, and I've had this myself where like I was really afraid, like I created a world that I was so in love with that had like awesome things going on in it. And so my players, the extent to which they could influence that world was limited, because no, you can't kill the Grand Empress. She's the Grand Empress that's been destined by fate to rule for the next 1,000 years. Well, I mean, no. Like, it's cool when she dies. Like, that's what makes it cool. When the Grand Empress that is supposed to rule for 1,000 years is killed. It's cool when the unbreakable city is broken. It's cool when your world, like, there was this great line that I love that lives with me, is your world will look better on fire. Kill your darlings, destroy it, but make sure that you take the time first to show your players just how beautiful that world was, and then light it on fire in front of them.
I'm going to openly admit that Monty made me cry in one of the most recent sessions, because I wasn't prepared for the fact that I get really into my characters. And actually, it was the beginning of that session where I was like, hey, Monty, I just realized that the family dynamic I created with my character is the same as my actual family. Yeah. And then that at the end of that session, my dad in the game was killed by hobgoblins.
And turned into a zombie.
Which I then had to discover. And I was not, like, it actually drove my character even harder. Like, I role played it even harder. I am vengeful now. Like, there are so many things happening to my character's mentality towards this war. But I was like shocked when we were on a mission, and I was using the sending stone to send my dad, being like, the hobgoblins are coming, hole up in the castle, protect it. And then somebody was like, don't you have a secret entrance? And the hobgoblin...
Oh yeah, this was the callback. So the story here is that earlier in the campaign, Kelly and our friend Josh had created characters that grew up together living in a castle. And they knew about, and Kelly had written in his backstory that there was a secret passage leading from the castle to a tavern in the town outside that was only known to the members of his family. And then earlier in the campaign, one of the player characters that knew this secret was killed. And so the hobgoblins collected the body and used magic to find out from that body the secrets that they needed to that secret. Just using stuff like Speak with Dead and divination spells, and there's, I kind of hand waved it, but it felt appropriate.
I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, nobody did. And then we had the interplay with the villain where they were like, "I have Strike Force ready to take over your castle,"
and I was like, "Nah, my castle's protected." And then he was like, "What about that secret entrance we know about?" And I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And then, of course, that was the downfall of my whole family in the game. And now Kalik is angry.
Aw, yeah. Poor Kalik. Multiracial Lion also asked us, would you at all recommend including existing modules into a campaign for a new DM in order to try to get a hang of things? I don't really know what I'm doing, and I'm going to try to incorporate Lost Mine of Phandelver into my game world so that I can sort of learn how to set up plots and maps and that sort of thing before setting my players loose on an unsuspecting world.
Lost Mines of Phandelver is a perfect way to start as a first-time DM. It kind of gives you everything that you need. The first mission is honestly just one of my favorite missions for a level 1 character.
That goblin cave is so good.
It's such a fun goblin cave. There's like the traps, there's the secrets, there's the enemies. It has a little bit of everything, and honestly it leaves it pretty open-ended that you could easily run Lost Mines of Phandelver and then branch out into whatever you want. And then using Lost Mines of Phandelver, you also create a home base for your players. It becomes kind of like, they can rebuild the manor. They can make Phandelver their home. And yeah, it's just like really, really fun.
I heard that is Lost Boys of Phandelver. Like it. I mean, The Red Brands could be the Lost Boys of Phandelver. I like that.
There you go.
Yeah. I think it's great. In fact, I do it all the time. I think that using a module as at least the skeleton for your campaign is just good DMing. Especially like, and this comes back to one of those earlier points that we were saying of like steal where you can. You're not writing a novel. If you're writing a novel, then write a novel. But you're doing an activity for your friends. And just like when you're cooking for your friends, you use a recipe, or you use that recipe that's your old standby, right? Like use those resources that exist for you, because your time is valuable. Your time is a resource. And you want to choose to focus your time on the things that you're really good at and use supplemental material to bring that up. I'm not a good artist, so I scour Pinterest for fantasy art that I can use as handouts. I don't spend time trying to learn how to draw, right? On the other hand, I am pretty good at painting miniatures, and I love doing that. So it's totally worthwhile for me to once in a while paint a miniature for my player characters, and that's a better use of my time, right? You might be really good at designing monsters, so design away and find interesting maps for those monsters to populate. Find out what your strengths are as a dungeon master. Spend your time on those strengths, and then use supplemental material to build those up. If you're amazing at crafting a political intrigue, if you know how to move all these moving parts around, if you know how to make a good story, use someone else's map. Don't waste time making stats for every NPC. Use stat blocks from elsewhere. Steal those things. Focus your skills in on what you're good at. Steal everything else to fill in the gaps.
The other thing to keep in mind is if you are going to run a pre-written module, they are not a Bible that you need to follow word for word. Yeah. I am running Rise of Tiamat, and there are little paragraphs. There's even like parts that are one sentence that I read, and my mind just goes, well, this needs to be elaborated upon. You can't just say, one of my favorite things that, as my party calls it, I fluff things up a lot. There's the part where they go and visit the metallic dragons, like I said, and it's just like they meet in the mountains and there's a meeting with the metallic dragons. I was like, no, I want there to be like a place that the metallic dragons meet, like a temple up there, and I want like all of these people that live there and who goes to visit the metallic dragons. And we played like a 3-game night or 3 nights of hanging out with the metallic dragons and the people who worship them and go up into the mountains to do that. Some of our favorite NPCs come from there. People remember the world, and that just like popped out of my imagination from reading the module.
I'll say this is a bit of pulling the veil back, but in our campaign, we're running Red Hand of Doom.
Yeah.
We did this whole section with the dwarves. That's a footnote in the real adventure. I added that whole thing in, and it was a really memorable section of the campaign that I was like needed to be brought up, and I based that around another module that I'd read as well. So it is a great place to like bulk out your stuff. Do we plan to write and share any one short stories or campaigns? Yes, we do. Again, this is one of the things that we want to take the time to do well and do right. Both Kelly and I have a short adventure that we've each written that we're kind of passing back and forth between each other, that we want to make sure it's really polished. I'm not like, it's really easy to find a lot of great content on like the home brewery or shared on D&D Wiki, not really, but that's shared online, and we want to make sure that anything that we put out from us has an extra level of spit shine and polish, including artwork. And Kelly has been furiously drawing some amazing original artwork to illustrate some new offerings that we're going to put out. And we put a lot of time into these things, so they probably won't be for free, but we're really excited about them, and we want to make sure that there's something available by us that people can check out, probably through the DMs Guild. We'll release them.
DMs Guild, you're going to be able to find some stuff from us soon. We're putting some finishing touches on our first iteration of homebrewed content. And then we have a lot of other ideas that me and Monty are constantly working on. So it's been a work in progress for like the last several months. But that is one way that we're hoping to expand Dungeon Dudes, is by adding our own content to the DMs Guild.
But like one of the requirements that both Kelly and I have had for anything that we publish in that way is we don't ever want to release anything that hasn't been battle tested. If you want to go find a bunch of magic items that you can add to your campaign, you can find a ton of magic items online that have never been actually used in a campaign. But a bunch of the things that we want to release, we want to make sure that they're things that have actually survived contact with actual players and been used in actual campaigns and adventures that we have actually run, so that we are presenting them in hopefully a useful way. So if you are interested in that stuff, we would love to hear in like any comments or anything what you might be interested in. We're hoping to keep them short and sweet. But again, it follows through. We want to make sure it's quality stuff, that we're not just putting out a bunch of notes.
Anything that the Dungeon Dudes release, we actually put a lot of work into it beforehand to make sure that it meets our standards. And we have pretty high standards for ourselves.
Yeah.
So we hope that you guys see that too, and that anything that we put out, you can tell has had a lot of love and care put into it.
Thanks so much to the generous support of our patrons. We've been able to get some new lighting equipment, set up we got some used DSLR cameras and some fancier stuff for recording the main show. And so we are in the process of planning a live stream actual play that will hopefully be starting this spring or fall.
Yeah, this fall. We're both extremely excited, and we've had a lot of people requesting us to do a live play for a while. But one thing, once again, we didn't want to do it until we felt that we were going to do it right, and we wanted to make sure that we had the right equipment, the right setup, and we've been working very hard to kind of create a world and a setting that we hope that you guys are all really going to enjoy.
Yeah, and we also had to wait for a new game table, which is finally on its last leg of shipping to me now, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, new gaming table. Yeah. We have new lights, new cameras. We've been putting a ton of prep work into this, so we can't really announce any official dates or anything at this point.
We have a small preview for our patrons. That is, we're getting feedback from our patrons as well, who've been a very helpful test audience for us, and getting some feedback from a few other close friends that have been really helpful in this respect. Because again, like Oracle asks, the Table of Ultimate Gaming. Yes, it's the Table of Ultimate Gaming. I backed it last year, and I finally got the notification that it's shown up in Toronto, and I just have to wait for UPS to get off their butts and bring it to me. So
I'm excited to play on that table.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it too.
But yeah, we hope that you guys enjoy what we have coming.
Yeah. What else do we have coming down the pipeline? We got new videos.
We have a ton of new video ideas. We basically have plans. We're going to be starting a few new series. We just finished off our core class guides, which we hope that you guys really liked. So we're now going to be filling that space with a few new ideas. One person asked me recently, well, you guys are probably going to run out of content soon, in which case I laughed, and I was like, dude, do you know how many books there are?
And they just keep coming out.
They keep coming out.
We've got a lot of books coming out because we got two new adventures coming out from Wizards of the Coast this fall. We've got the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica coming out. So lots of cool stuff that we're really excited to get into. We've been asked, and we've heard everybody asking us time and time again, will you do class guides for the Blood Hunter, the Artificer, and the Mystic? And yes, we will. The big holdup for all of those is that we have to get some table time with them. We don't want to do a class guide for a class that we haven't seen in play.
A lot of people are saying that they did like the class guides. I also, funny thing here, you never thought you'd play a paladin. I can tell you very honestly, filming the class guides, every single time we filmed a class guide, I would go home and make a character for that class. And there was like 5 classes that I was like, I'm not interested. And as soon as I would research it and do the class guide, I was like, oh my God, I have so many ideas for this class now. And it's ruined me. I have so many characters I want to play now thanks to making our class guides.
Yeah. The Multiracial Lion asked, any more plans on doing module and book reviews? Yes. We're going to review the new modules and new books as they come out. And when we have time in our schedule, like if we're we have so many ideas and we really want to go back and do the modules like Out of the Abyss and Rise of Tiamat and Curse of Strahd and do reviews for those. It's a bit of a catch-22 because we feel like this is part of our thing about delivering quality content. We feel like we owe it to you guys to have run those modules before we review them. And so obviously running all of Curse of Strahd takes a long time. Those things will happen as we do. Kelly's gearing up to run Out of the Abyss, and he's just finishing up Rise of Tiamat. And I'm hoping that I can find the time to run another module at our local Adventurers League. So that's a big part of what matters to us. It's important to us to not pontificate on things that we don't actually know anything about.
Yeah, we want to give you guys informed opinions and things of that sort. So as I've said a few times in the ending of this is we hold ourselves to a very high standard, and we want to continue to do that. And we don't want to put out anything that isn't to our liking or meets our very high bar that we've set for ourselves.
Yeah.
Anyway, that about wraps up. We've gone a little bit over the hour, but yeah, I hope that we can do more of these in the future.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm very excited to continue watching our show grow, to expand it in new and creative ways. And we're going to be releasing so much cool stuff for you guys soon.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.